Hey y'all, so thank you so much for watching my first video and for your super thoughtful questions. I'm just gonna kind of go through them and answer them. They're all really great, and I think you have some great things to think about and have given me some good things to think about. So some of the questions may kind of overlap and I may kind of skip over one if we've talked about it before, but I have your questions pulled up here and we'll just kind of go through them. So first we have from Taylor, do the artists at the studio help decide what an exhibition show should be? If so, my understanding is that is a pretty hands-off approach, as you explained that you and your partner are art facilitators and that the work is all self-directed. With that being said, are there any strict parameters or guidelines that need to be met or followed to be incorporated into a show or exhibition, since these are professional and working artists? So I think that's a really great question. And the answer is absolutely. There are guidelines or but the guidelines are the same as kind of what would exist in any sort of professional gallery space. So because we look at what we do as working with professional artists rather than any sort of art therapy or day hab program, we definitely look for a caliber of work. And again, I think that it's really important to sort of let the artists and their voices come through, but definitely Katie, my partner, and I are sort of ultimately curating the show and looking for work that we feel like coalesces or that meets a certain sort of standard of gallery exhibition. So I think a big thing that we kind of think about is how finished the work looks, what medium the work is in. We tend to, I think, gravitate toward exhibiting work that is in more kind of quote unquote professional mediums. So using pastels, paints, paint markers, rather than marker or simply, ballpoint pen. Although, it's sort of a case by case basis. So at the end of the day, I think it's a little bit intangible, but as the curators of the gallery, we definitely are sort of looking for specific things in each piece. So it's not as if any piece that the artist creates is definitely going to be shown and exhibited. If an artist is ready to move on from his or her, if an artist is ready to move on from the studio space and is ready to dive headfirst into their own venture in the sense of art business, or other, does Sage provide transitional services to help the artist get connected with resources that they may need to branch out on their own? And what does that look like? I would say that we are not, I, in my day job, am a special education teacher. And so I do a lot of connecting the dots and providing resources and transitional materials and services for families and for my students. But at Sage, we really look at what we do as a professional art gallery. That being said, I think there's always going to be exceptions. And if a family or if an individual really needs support connecting to a resource, because I have that background in social work, I'm absolutely willing to lend a hand. But in general, that's not under the umbrella of the services that Sage provides. I will say that there are some kind of examples more than an artist kind of branching out on their own. We have artists that currently exhibit and sell their work elsewhere and have their own websites. For example, Charlie French, who is an abstract painter based out of Dallas, Texas, that we show and represent. He has a really thriving online presence of his own. His Instagram is fabulous. You guys should all follow him. Another example of that is Gav Sears. He is an artist that does a lot of architectural work based out of San Marcos, Texas. He was working and had kind of his own practice and his own presence before he started working with Sage. And we don't have any sort of proprietary sort of management or stake over the artist. So if they choose to exhibit work elsewhere or if they choose to sell their work independently, that's absolutely fine as well. And then this has always been one of my dream jobs when I said I wanted to pursue art education, and I'm not entirely sure how to find resources or places near me that offer these opportunities or how to get involved with them. From your perspective as a co-founder of Sage Studio, what are some recommendations you have for finding an outsider art studio such as the one you help run in Texas? So there's a great kind of directory called Disparate Minds, and they have a really nice listing of studios across the country and the world. Another kind of key word that I would search is progressive studio, more so than outsider art gallery or outsider art studio. Progressive studio is kind of the term that was coined early on by the Katzes in the 70s, and that's still used today amongst a lot of studios like Sage. So I would try searching, looking at the Disparate Minds directory, and then also looking for a progressive studio in Colorado. You mentioned that certain accommodations were given to artists with specific needs, and I was wondering if you could go into more details about this. Do you supply specialized art materials, or do they bring their own if they need them? So we do provide materials in the studio, and since we work with such a small group of artists, we really try to customize those materials to fit the artist and what their sort of style or what their preferences are. We do also have artists that bring in their own supplies. You know, we have artists on the spectrum that really prefer working with their own materials, and that's absolutely fine. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis. If an artist needs a certain, large handle paintbrush, that would definitely be something that we would be more than happy to accommodate. How do you obtain funding for the rent space, art supplies, and other materials and needs for the day-to-day operations? Do the artists pay or use the space as with the co-op? Okay, so initially we were entirely self-funded, and that was pretty minimal because we were working out of our homes. Eventually, when we sort of grew, we put in some more of our own money, and then we started applying for grant funding. So we received some grant funding through the city, through and through other disability-specific grants. We also make a lot of, honestly, the majority of our income comes from merchandise and art sales, which is, we feel really lucky. Our ultimate goal is to be able to do this as our job. As I said, I currently am also a full-time teacher. So we have in the last 2 years started paying ourselves, which was a new thing, but I think it's important to sort of be transparent and honest about the fact that for several years we were not paying ourselves and we were putting money into this because it was a passion project. So yeah, a little bit of everything. We've done self-funding, grants, we've done some kind of fundraisers, we have sold merchandise, and we are looking into doing kind of a sustaining membership program for people who want to give on a regular basis. And we are in the process, I believe I said, of applying for our 501c3 or our nonprofit status, which will allow us to obtain hopefully even more grant funding, which will be, I think, probably the most sustainable way to keep those funding costs under control. So this is from Kelly. I'd like to know more about stepping back as a facilitator. Do you have any aha moments you can share with us about learning to let go? So I think I don't know if I can point to a specific aha moment, but more just that I tend to really love the work that the artists are producing. And so understanding that their vision is kind of paramount to the product that they're creating means that the less in the way I can be, the better. So I think that kind of makes it easy for me to step out. And, I do think there is a certain amount of relinquishing of control that happens, but I think that's part of sort of the artistic practice in general. I think that trusting art as kind of an intuitive process is really important. So in terms, the term outsider artist has always struck me as odd. Have the artists ever expressed concern, wonder to you about this term? So honestly, we don't use the term outsider artist too much. It's kind of a catch-all still in the kind of art world. It's also referred to as like naive art or folk art. And the term outsider artist doesn't necessarily apply just to artists with disabilities. It also applies to artists. Essentially, it's kind of the umbrella term for artists that didn't go to school and aren't formally trained. But I do think that personally, I think the term is sort of problematic in the sense of who is, who is determining the canon of who's inside and who's outside. And so I think the more that we integrate the voices of artists with disabilities, artists with mental health diagnosis, artists that aren't formally trained, the more we can kind of move away from that sort of insider and outsider compartmentalization. What artists can you recommend to check out nationwide? Oh my goodness, so many. I would really, I have a couple of studios that have just some of my favorite artists. I would really recommend you guys check out Land Gallery, LAND, in New York. They have some of my favorite artists. Creative Growth and Creativity Explored in California have some really amazing artists working there. Yeah, those are really good places to start, but there are just so many that I'm inspired by all the time. And Instagram is a really great way to find. A lot of those studios have Instagram presences, and you can kind of find out a lot about a bunch of different new exciting artists by checking out progressive studios and following them on Instagram. Would you ever travel outside of the country after COVID to explore other cultures and assist giving people there with disabilities an artistic voice? I would love to travel outside the country. There's an Outsider Art Fair in New York, which I think I mentioned we have participated in twice, but there's also one in Paris, and I think that would be really exciting. The other thing that I think is noteworthy and maybe speaks a little bit to your question is there are progressive studios in other countries. There are some really great ones in France. We worked with an artist with Down syndrome from Spain. There are a couple studios. There are some really amazing studios in Australia that work with Indigenous artists. So there are people that are doing that work and are highlighting those voices already and doing a really excellent job. So I think those are definitely things that I would recommend y'all checking out.